The 2022-23 Premier League season is finished, but what will it be remembered for? Erling Haaland's 36 goals, Chelsea setting a worldwide spending record and finishing 12th, or Nathan Jones's bizarre press conferences during his 8-game stint at Southampton? It might be all of the above. Or perhaps it is a season that will be remembered for some of the players who used it to really launch their careers. A couple of weeks ago, I made a video picking out the biggest flop at every Premier League team this season, and I have been riddled with guilt ever since. So following plenty of requests, I have decided to do the opposite and take a look at the biggest overachievers, who outperformed expectations and enjoyed breakout campaigns this season. A breakout star can be an 18-year-old who made their debuts this season, a new signing who arrived with little pedigree or expectation, or a player that has been at the club for a while now but without doing much until this season, in which they really broke out, so to speak. I know that sounds a bit nebulous, but hopefully you understand broadly what I mean, and if you don't, I'm sure you will once we begin. Without further ado then, who famously broke out in the 2004 season as a 14 and 15-year-old, though admittedly it was all downhill from there, here is, in my view, the biggest breakout star at every Premier League team this season. Arsenal. William Saliba. William Saliba has been very highly rated since the moment that Arsenal signed him, which was 4 years ago now, and many Arsenal fans couldn't understand why the club kept sending him out on loan. In his first 3 seasons contracted to the Gunners, during which time Arsenal finished 8th again, and then 5th, and were hardly free of defensive problems at times, Saliba was shipped out to Saint Etienne, Nice, and Marseille on loan. You could either interpret Saliba's success this season as Arsenal fans who were clamouring to see him earlier having been vindicated, or Arsenal's hierarchy having been proven right in being patient and prioritising his development, but either way, he has been outstanding in his first season playing in North London. Still aged only 22, Saliba's partnership with a 25-year-old Gabriel Magalhaes ought to provide Arsenal fans with plenty of hope for the future. And I don't think that it is any particular coincidence that Arsenal's form basically collapsed in the last quarter of the season while Saliba was out injured. The Frenchman, who has already been capped 8 times by the World Cup finalists, should be fit to return from his back injury in time for pre-season as Arsenal look to go again next season. Aston Villa. Cameron Archer. I wanted to go with Ollie Watkins for Aston Villa because it just feels instinctively to me as though this has been a breakout campaign for him, particularly since Unai Emery arrived and Danny Ings departed, but the stats don't really back it up. In his debut campaign at Villa Park, following a potential £33 million move from Brentford in 2020, Watkins scored 14 goals in 37 Premier League games and 16 goals in 40 games in all competitions. That is pretty much identical to his record this season, in which he has also scored 16 goals, and bearing in mind that he also hit double figures last season and struck 25 times in the Championship in his last season at Brentford, it seems a bit disingenuous to call this a breakout campaign, even if I would maintain that it is his best yet. Jacob Ramsey, likewise, has enjoyed his best ever season, having just turned 22, but last season was clearly his breakout campaign. That left me with no other option than to pick a player who has played just 7 games for Aston Villa this season and who did his breaking out elsewhere. Following an impressive loan spell at Preston last season, virtually every team in the Championship wanted Cameron Archer on loan last summer, but Steven Gerrard chose to keep hold of him. Having barely played by January though, Unai Emery allowed the youngster to join Middlesbrough, where he smashed in 11 goals in 20 Championship matches, becoming a key part of Michael Carrick's revolution. Borough are unsurprisingly keen to keep hold of Archer then, but reports suggest that Villa would demand a fee of in excess of £20 million, twinned with several favourable clauses. And with European football to contend with next season, Unai Emery will need a deep squad that is capable of being rotated. Bournemouth. Dominic Solanke. It was very easy to dunk on Dominic Solanke when he went about 40 games without scoring a single goal as a centre-forward, including after Bournemouth paid £19 million for him, but I always maintained, and you can go and check the archives on this if you want, that a season in the Championship would do him wonders, and that he would be a Premier League footballer again before long. It ended up being 2 seasons in the Championship for Solanke, and, if anything, that helped him even more. To look at Solanke's record in the Premier League this season, just 6 goals in 33 games, you'd hardly say that he has set the world alight. But Bournemouth fans will tell you all about the incredible work that he does aside from just scoring goals. Tireless and selfless, Solanke has more assists than goals in the league this season, and I'm happy for him that he's bounced back from being the butt of quite so many jokes to playing a key role in Bournemouth's unlikely survival. One of England's most decorated youth team players of all time, I would argue that Solanke is now worth more than the £19 million that Bournemouth were mocked for paying for him in the first place, and he features narrowly ahead of January arrival Dango Ouattara for the Cherries. Brentford. Matthias Jensen. What an absolutely incredible season Brentford have had. The lowest spenders in the Premier League with the lowest wage bill, the Bees followed up an outstanding debut campaign in the Premier League, in which they finished 13th last season, with 13 extra points and a 9th place finish above their West London rivals Chelsea and Fulham this season. Most of Brentford's star players this season, Tony, Pinnock, Mbeumo, Me, Hire, etc., may have outperformed expectations once again this season, but don't quite fit the mould of breakout stars. Matthias Jensen, on the other hand, despite the fact that he's already 27 years old, most assuredly does. The Danish midfielder, who joined Brentford from Celta Vigo in 2019, was really a squad player last season, playing around 1,500 minutes of football, scoring 0 goals, and making just 1 assist. This season, he was tasked with replacing his fellow countryman Christian Eriksen as the primary creative force in Brentford's midfield. That would have seemed like a tall order to even his biggest admirers 12 months ago, but Jensen has done it expertly. Only Tony and Mbeumo made more goal contributions at Brentford this season, and Jensen's vision and risk-taking in the pass have been crucial to Brentford's ability to break through the lines. Brighton and Hove Albion. Moises Caicedo. There are more candidates from Brighton than about 10 other Premier League teams combined, and virtually their entire squad, yet again, has massively outperformed expectations. Kaoru Mitoma, Evan Ferguson, Julio Enciso and Facundo Buonanotte would all fit the description of breakout stars and would probably be the inclusion for just about every other Premier League team. From a raft of candidates though, my choice is Moises Caicedo, who I honestly think is capable of becoming one of the best midfielders in the world. Signed by Brighton for a reported €5 million in February 2021, Caicedo spent the first half of last season on loan at Belgian side Beerschot, before playing 8 league games after he was recalled in January by the Seagulls. This season, however, Caicedo has played 37 Premier League games, only dropped for a game against Arsenal whilst the Gunners were trying to sign him. Caicedo released a statement on his Instagram announcing his intention to leave Brighton, but the club held firm, and in March, he penned a new long-term deal. I hope that Caicedo stays at Brighton, just because it would be interesting to see them challenge again next season, but eventually he will play for a bona fide super club, of that I've no doubt. He is simply too good. Chelsea. Lewis Hall. It's almost impossible to put in words just what an abysmal season Chelsea have had, having spent a record-breaking £600 million on signings this season, more than £300 million in the January window alone, and over £50 million hiring and firing managers, only to finish closer in terms of points to the relegation zone than to their West London neighbours Brentford in 9th. Well, I suppose we gave it a good go. Nonetheless, whilst almost everyone else has fallen far short of expectations and massively underwhelmed, there is one clear candidate as the biggest breakout star at Stamford Bridge this season. Lewis Hall is just 18 years old, and he hadn't played a single minute of Premier League football prior to the beginning of this season. capable either of playing at left back, on the left side of midfield, or in either a defensive or central midfield role. When Hull saw Chelsea sign Marc Cucurella for £62 million to join £45 million Ben Chilwell in the left back department, he can't have expected anything more than another season of academy football or a stint out on loan this season. Instead, he has made 11 first-team appearances, and they have largely been very impressive. Quick, industrious, and capable of flashing a lovely ball into the box. In a season of manure at Stamford Bridge, Hall is the one crop that seems to have been fertilised by it. Crystal Palace, Eberechi Eze. Subscribers to this channel who watch all of my videos, or intelligent people of fine taste as they are otherwise known, will be sick and tired of hearing me wax lyrical about Eberechi Eze by this stage. Ever since he put in one of the best individual performances that I've ever witnessed live against Hull City, I've been convinced that he's destined for the very top. And this season, it finally seems to be happening. Sidelined with an Achilles tendon injury for much of last season, Eze made just 13 Premier League appearances, scoring 1 goal and making 1 assist. This season, by contrast, he played in all 38 Premier League matches for Crystal Palace, scoring 10 goals and making 4 assists, and his season ended, quite fittingly, with a first England call-up from Gareth Southgate. Still aged only 24, Eze's 2019-20 season at QPR could be considered his real breakout campaign, albeit in a lower league, but narrowly ahead of Michael Elise and Cheikh Doucouré. I felt that he was the most appropriate of the available candidates. Everton, James Garner. Ever since I did a Q&A where one of the questions that I was asked was, which professional football player are you most similar to in terms of your style of play, and I picked James Garner, only for most people to respond by saying that they had no idea who I was talking about, I have been quietly rooting for James Garner, who presumably learned everything that he knows by watching clips of me. Impressive on loan from Manchester United at Nottingham Forest in the Championship, this has certainly been Garner's breakout campaign in the Premier League, where he had played just 2 games prior to this season, the most recent of which came about 3 years ago. This season, he has played 16 times in the league, and at least whenever I've seen him, whilst he might not have set the world alight, I've been pretty impressed. He features ahead of Dwight McNeil, whose breakout campaign surely came at Burnley before joining Everton, and 21-year-old right-back Nathan Patterson. Fulham, Andreas Pereira. I was torn between Andreas Pereira and Kenny Tete at Fulham, both of whom were excellent this season, but in the end, I've given it to the Belgian-born once-capped Brazilian international. Signed by Manchester United at the age of 15 and long tipped to make the grade at Old Trafford, it never quite worked out for Andreas, who went out on loan to Granada, Valencia, Lazio and Flamengo without ever pulling up any trees or convincing the Red Devils that he deserved to start games. Fulham signed Andreas for £10 million in the summer, which is pocket change by Premier League standards these days, but that now looks to have been a wonderful piece of business. One of Fulham's star players this season, as the Cottagers shed their reputation as a yo-yo club and finished 10th, Andreas scored 4 goals and made 6 assists, whilst putting in probably the best corners of any set-piece specialist in the division. Manor Solomon, who got better and better as the campaign went on, along with Kenny Tete, who I would rank among the best right-backs in the Premier League last season, both earn honourable mentions. Leeds United, Wilfred Nonso. As Leeds United's 3-year Premier League adventure came to a pretty miserable and uninspiring end, the fear is now that they will lose some of their most talented young players, Wilfred Nonso perhaps foremost among them. Signed for a fee of just £3.8 million from FC Zurich last summer, Nonso has been a bright spark in a dark and gloomy campaign at Ellen Road, and if he does depart this summer, which you would imagine he will, it is likely to be for upwards of 6 times what Leeds paid for him. Skillful, energetic and inventive, Nonso chipped in with 2 goals and 4 assists for Leeds, despite only playing about 40% of their available Premier League minutes throughout the campaign. An honourable mention goes to Crescencio Somerville, who was probably Leeds' most improved player this season compared to last, in what was certainly a breakout campaign for him in English football. Leicester City, Daniel Everson. It would be more accurate to say that Leicester City broke this season than it would be to say that they had any true breakout stars, which makes this segment borderline impossible. So many foxes underwhelmed this term, from Wilfred Ndidi to Jamie Vardy, and the only players that I can really think of who didn't, and who did possibly exceed expectations, are the two Danes Daniel Everson and Victor Christiansen. Having started at Preston on loan in the Championship last season, it took Everson a long time to leapfrog Danny Ward and become Leicester's new number one. But once he did okay. Anything more than okay would be pushing it as a description for either Everson or Christiansen, but they are at least two players who you could imagine forming the backbone of a Leicester team that looks to make an immediate return to the Premier League next season. Liverpool. Stefan Bye. From second last season with a whopping 92 points, which would have won them the Premier League title this season, to fifth this season and failure to even qualify for the Champions League with just 67 points, it has been a bitterly disappointing campaign for Liverpool. One positive, however, has been the emergence of Stefan Bye, an 18-year-old Spanish youth team international who is of Serbian descent. Bye joined Liverpool from Celta Vigo for a fee of just £224,000 in 2020, and prior to this season, he was yet to make his competitive first-team debut at any level. Partly due to a midfield crisis, it must be said, Bye ended up playing 19 games this season, and for the most part, I thought that he gave a really good account of himself. Unfortunately, he tore his abductor muscle in March and has been sidelined ever since, otherwise he would have made even more appearances, but Jurgen Klopp has said that he's hopeful that he'll be able to return in time for pre-season. Manchester City. Rico Lewis. It has been another brilliant season for Manchester City, which could still become an all-time great one, and I should point out that I am recording this before the FA Cup final, but most of their star players this season broke out a long time ago, and their impressive performances have come as little surprise. Erling Haaland has perhaps outperformed what were already sky-high expectations, but to call a man who scored 41 goals in 41 games for Borussia Dortmund 2 years ago, and is already one of the highest-paid players on the planet, a breakout star, would feel more than a little bit daft to me. Rico Lewis takes this one almost by default then, but he would be an outstanding candidate regardless. Aged 18, and never having played first-team football before this season, Lewis has played a whopping 22 times in an incredible season at the Etihad, and not once has he looked remotely out of his depth. It will be interesting to see how long he has to wait for his first England cap. Manchester United. Alejandro Garnacho. A few Manchester United players, whether that be Aaron Wan-Bissaka or Diego Dalot, could be described as having outperformed expectations this season, but Alejandro Garnacho is the obvious candidate as their breakout star. The 18-year-old made 2 appearances as a 17-year-old towards the back end of last season, but this season he became involved far more than pretty much anyone could have anticipated. He has made 33 appearances in all competitions, which is quite incredible for an 18-year-old at Manchester United, scoring 5 goals and making 5 assists. Make no mistake, Garnacho still has a long way to go and many aspects of his game that require work, but he has amazing experience for a player of his age and is the outstanding candidate from Erik ten Hag's squad this season. Newcastle United. Miguel Almiron. The oldest player in this video, Miguel Almiron, is 29 years old, which begs the question, how on earth can he be considered a breakout star in his 5th season at Newcastle? I watched a fair bit of Almiron when he made the MLS Best 11 2 seasons running with Atlanta United, and whilst there is an obvious step up in class to the Premier League, I was really excited to see how he would get on at Newcastle. The answer, for his first 3.5 seasons at the club, was a little bit underwhelming. Almiron always worked hard, and he was never terrible, but it was a far cry from the goal-scoring and creating flair player and playmaker that lit up the MLS. Prior to the start of this season, Almiron had scored 9 goals and made 3 assists in 110 Premier League appearances. That is, let's be honest, a pretty miserable record, and it put him on the receiving end of some not particularly generous comments from Manchester City's Jack Grealish. This season, Almiron has scored over twice as many goals as Grealish, 11, in addition to making 4 assists. His first half of the season was much more impressive than his second, but overall, it has been a season in which he has silenced a lot of his critics, and for that reason he features. Nottingham Forest, Danilo. It's no secret that Nottingham Forest signed a lot of players and spent a lot of money this season, setting records for both as a newly promoted club, but they reaped the rewards with survival, after sticking with Steve Cooper relatively comfortably in the end, finishing 4 points above the drop. I think it's perhaps underestimated quite how crucial Forest's January interventions in the market were to their survival. Most notably the loan signing of Keylor Navas, along with Brazilian duo Felipe and Danilo. Navas is a 3-time Champions League winner, and Felipe a La Liga title winner with Atletico Madrid, but Danilo arrived in Nottinghamshire with much less pedigree. Aged 21 at the time, Forest paid Palmeiras £16 million for Danilo, with high hopes about his potential, but some doubts about whether he would necessarily make the instant impact that would keep them in the Premier League. Those doubts were quickly extinguished. Danilo has been outstanding, providing Forest with a foothold in midfield and chipping in with a few key goals. He looks like a future Brazilian international, without wanting to put too much pressure on him, and Forest will be delighted to have him tied down on a 6.5-year deal for whatever happens next. Southampton, Romeo Lavia. It has been a wretched season for Southampton, but their player of the season, along with the inevitable James Ward-Prowse, has been 19-year-old Romeo Lavia. Lavia has been so impressive all season that people just take it for granted now, but for a midfielder who was 18 when the season began and had never played a single minute of league football before in his life, to play 34 times and be his club's best player in his debut campaign, in the Premier League no less, is absolutely astonishing. Signed from Manchester City, the Citizens reportedly inserted a £40 million buyback clause into that deal, and it now appears as though they would be fools not to trigger it. If Lavia does somehow stick around at Southampton, which seems like a long shot, he will look like a cheat code in the Championship. An honourable mention should perhaps go to young Carlos Alcaraz, who was signed by the Saints in January and was a rare bright spark during the second half of their campaign. Tottenham Hotspur, Pap Sarr. No offence to Tottenham, but I am really scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one. Pedro Porro has probably been the biggest success story at Spurs this season, outside of the usual candidates, but he twice made the Portuguese Primeira Liga Team of the Year with Sporting Club de Portugal before joining Tottenham, so you could hardly call him a breakout star. Pap Matthias Sarr, who, I must admit, has only played a paltry 466 minutes of football this season, did at least have slightly lower expectations heading into this campaign. Really impressive for both Metz and Senegal before joining Tottenham. Sarr is still only 20, but he has looked pretty decent in his cameo appearances in North London, and arguably deserved to play a little bit more. West Ham, Devin Mabama. If you thought that I was struggling with Spurs, with West Ham I am actually looking beneath the barrel in a hopeless attempt to find anyone who even remotely fits the bill. Devin Mabama is the best that I can do because I don't think that Flynn Downs, signed for £12 million from Swansea over the summer, can be considered a breakout star. Mubama, who plays for England's under-19s, made 6 appearances this season, 3 of which came in the Premier League, and that is the fewest of any player in this video, but it is still a fantastic accomplishment for an 18-year-old. And what's more, Mubama gave a pretty good account of himself. Big, quick and good in the air, he scored against AEK Larnaca in West Ham's run to the final of the Europa Conference League and won the West Ham United Young Player of the Year award this season. Wolves, Hugo Bueno. No offence to the last two, but this is actually quite a good inclusion. Though he was torn apart by Bukayo Saka in Wolves' final game of the season, that has happened to better and far more experienced players than him, and will do again, and it doesn't detract from what has been a fantastic season overall for Hugo Bueno. Born in Galicia but a graduate of Wolves' own youth ranks, having joined the club at the age of 16, something that wouldn't be possible with new post-Brexit regulations, Bueno had never played a competitive game of men's football in his life before the start of this season. And yet, this season, the 20-year-old has racked up 23 appearances, 21 of them coming in the Premier League, appearing in over half of Wolves' league fixtures, and he has played more than 1,300 minutes of football in total. Sure, he hasn't been perfect, but for an unsuspecting debut campaign, it has been pretty impressive. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, sincerely, for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Apparently that is beneficial in some way, shape or form. You know, just do it if you enjoyed it or feeling generous. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for both this channel and my backup channel, both of which should be on your screens or about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.